I uh, I had just finished making a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Before the Flood, and he asked me. I was editing something else, and he asked me to come over and meet him for lunch in Brooklyn at the racetrack, and I didn't know what he was talking about because I live in Brooklyn, and I said, "There's no racetrack in Brooklyn." He goes, "Oh yeah, there is." And sure enough, like 7 minutes from my house on my Vespa, not by walking, there was a racetrack being built, and they were going to race electric cars. I'd never heard of it. And he introduced me to Alejandro Agag, who's in the movie, the kind of ringmaster behind Formula E. And we started talking. It was kind of interesting. It was the tryout day. It was a pre-race day. It wasn't the day of the race. It was the day before. And I thought it was cool. It was quiet. I really didn't give a shit about racing, man, to be honest, and cars. I didn't learn to drive till I was older and living in New York City. And I thought it was interesting and cool. And Leo's like, well, I think we should make another documentary, but about this. And I was like, what? And I was kind of taken aback at first. And then I met Alejandro. He was interesting. And Leo said, we could actually tell an environmental story without preaching and just tell it through sport so that everybody starts buying electric cars. And anyway, I call up Malcolm, who's my friend living in London, who's a Formula One guy like you are, or you were, Alex, and and also one of the great directors that I knew. And I said, hey man, have you heard of Formula E? And he'd heard of it, but I don't think he was, he'll tell you, but I don't think he was that excited about it. And I said, they want to fly me to Spain to meet all the drivers and see if there's a movie here. Why don't you come with me? So he did. He came with me. And, I approach the film like I approach any movie where it's about people and characters. And once I hung with Alejandro and met the drivers and I kind of saw the world, which I knew nothing about, I was like, I think we could tell a cool story here about following the season. They're trying to change the way that they drive, make the batteries more efficient. And at the same time, it's a competition film. So people love competition films. And once I met the drivers, I said, we could do something here. So Malcolm and I signed on with Leo producing, and we started shooting the fourth season. Would you say, Malc? That's kind of how.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Fish flew me out to Valencia where we met. We looked at the cars, we met the drivers. We saw the possibility to make a project, and Fish saw this driver in the paddock. He looked at him, when he's interesting, we should follow him, and he ended up winning the championship. So I've got Fish's kind of instinct for casting and putting together a movie to thank, because if we'd followed the back marker up, the guy who was following up at the end, I'm not sure the film would have had its dramatic scale. We'd follow the champion from beginning to end, which I think was a great piece of insight from Fish. I think in a way it was like working on a play in a way, wasn't it? It's like casting and putting it together a play. There was an ensemble of actors, to make this kind of dramatic arc, which we got very lucky with. But you're talking about going to a Ferrari garage. It was like that for me in a way, to be able to be near the cars and to walk around them and see the drivers. It's something that was completely inaccessible to me growing up as a child in Birmingham in England, which is like Detroit. And my family were in the car industry, worked in the car industry. I worked in the car industry as a kid. I loved cars, but everything was inaccessible. It's a very rarefied atmosphere, motor racing. So to have this kind of access was a dream come true for me, a young child's dream.
Well, when you talk about access, I'm curious both in terms of getting the drivers to sign on to have their trajectory throughout the season documented, but also getting Formula E on board to allow you access. I mean, in many ways, it is very much showing how their industry directly affects the consumer industry as well, with the innovations that they come up with. But what were those conversations like to get them to sign off?
Well, I guess the only conflict was that we needed final cut, that they could never tell us like what to put in. So I think that was a kind of a bit of a negotiation that we had. I mean, as long as we didn't hurt their business with the film, which we didn't, they couldn't tell us what we could keep or what we could shoot. And they had no creative input whatsoever. I mean, we'd ask them questions and Alejandro questions, but so that wasn't a problem. Some of the drivers were sort of tough nuts to crack. You know, these guys are so used to being in front of the camera and saying a soundbite. And Jev and Andre, the Chichita team, there was something about them, like Malcolm said, when we first saw them, there was something where they had their guards down and where we knew, like, all right, these guys are who we want to follow. You got a rookie who's 10 years older than his teammate. And the rookie had won Le Mans 3 times. And the teammate had a fucking big chip on his shoulder and was, you know, a brooding dude. And I don't know, they all look like movie stars. You know, they all look, they're these amazing looking dudes. And like, we just got lucky. But there were a couple of them that we really had to break down. Like Sam Bird was after the first interview, I said, listen, man, I really like you, but if you want to be in this movie, those interviews are never going to fly. We're not like a corporate sponsor here. And if you're worried about hurting someone's feelings, you know, we need you to really show who you are. I mean, that's what we want, the essence of who you are. So it took a while, but we got him, I think. And yeah.
Circling back to what you were saying, Alex, earlier about students going out to document and you documenting a situation. I think what was interesting about watching Fisher, he infiltrated the drivers. The drivers are like sort of rare wild animals. Fisher was able to kind of stalk them and allow them to open up their, and inside a racing driver is what we wanted to capture, which is, you know, which is ambition, which is ruthlessness, which is a complete lack of love for any of their teammates, a desire to win, which is frightening, terrifying. Those are the goals. And I think how you stalk your prey and how you allow them to show their inner self, I think was fascinating to watch Fisher do that. Because I know I couldn't do it, and I learned a lot from watching him do it.
Were there any athletes that you were, I guess, I don't know, approached by who wanted to be a part, but you just didn't have the I guess, I don't know, the even just the filmmaking resources of people shooting to actually be able to incorporate as many people, or was, once you had found your guys, you had it all set?
It was definitely one or two guys that were give us kind of dirty looks after the third or fourth race because we weren't filming them. Yeah, we for sure felt that. There was also a couple of team owners that were a little pissed off that we didn't, you know, interview them more. So that was tough. I think there was another character that we thought at the beginning, you know, we kind of keyed on Jev and Andre and Grassi and this other guy, Sebastian Buemi, who had won a year before. And we quickly realized that Sebastian didn't really like talking to us and that he wasn't a Sam Bird who I could even, I didn't think that we were going to get much out of him. And he didn't seem very interested in speaking to us. And the beauty was that he didn't play into the competition that year, which was great. So that kind of worked out for us. But yeah, it was interesting. We filmed with this other guy, Felix, and it was really, you don't even see him much in the movie. We quickly realized, no, this isn't going to work either.
I mean, I think the drivers that we centered on were all basically, Fish mentioned the chip on the shoulder, and that was very, very evident because they'd all been thrown out of Formula One. They'd either been passed over, they'd been ignominiously thrown out, like Nelson Piquet Jr. for cheating. Jev had been fired by an English team, so therefore he hated English people. They're all carrying this terrible kind of anxiety and distrust and loathing of being thrown out of the great championship. So it was a redemption story for a lot of them. And that really drove, I think, Fisher's interviews, or the interviews with the drivers. It gave it the energy.
Well, you mentioned, Fisher, that you had basically people that you were following who didn't wind up becoming sufficiently, I guess, important enough to the story that you wind up telling in the feature. So what is that process like when you've spent that kind of time with someone and then know that they're not going to be represented with the same amount of time they were expecting?
I mean, they're not happy, and the other thing I have to say is that had there been one character that was unbelievably charismatic and you just couldn't stop watching him and he had a fade, that we probably would have kept them. But Nelson faded, and Nelson was fascinating because Nelson had this whole father thing, and ultimately we dug into fathers and sons with this movie, with Jeb's father, with Nelson's father, and Sam's sort of father. And I think yeah, it's like a movie, like Malcolm said. We cast it like a feature, so we were kind of lucky. The racing gods looked out for us in that it came down to Jeb and Sam at the end, and Sam ended up opening up to us. Had it been Jeb and Felix at the end, I think we would have been in trouble as filmmakers, to be honest, because I don't think Felix would have ever been that guy that Sam. And Sam and Jeb had such history together. And the truth was they actually had anger at each other. And we were able to kind of tap into that at the end. So, but, even, not everyone was even happy once the film was done. I know Degrassi kind of didn't love the way he was portrayed in the movie, even though he is the one guy that really knows about climate change. Climate change is a big issue for him, much bigger than the other guys. Knows everything about climate change, studies it. He's a brilliant kind of guy, but I don't think he loved the portrayal that we, in the end of the day.
Well, tell us a little bit about the production, because you can't be with everyone all the time, so you have to have some idea of how to budget your time across the people that you're filming, and also across the various races. And how did that work for you in terms of, first of all, were both of you at every shoot? Did you split up? Did you have things going on simultaneously? What are some of the ways in which you guys work together?
Well, we both lost quite a bit of weight. I think one day we walked 12 miles, going from paddock to paddock to paddock to paddock, because you can't, there's like a track and it's in a city, so you have to walk all the way around with the gear, and it's like crazy. So we keyed on like 5 or 6 races in the schedule from the beginning that we knew we both needed to be at, because we knew they were going to be important, and we knew Malcolm would have to take one crew and I'd have to take another. So I think we were together for 5 or 6 races, and then one of us was at all the others, basically, or almost all the others. So we kind of split it up, and the only guys I could say that we consistently shot every week was Tachita and Degrassi. Those guys, we definitely knew from the jump that we were following them, so we wanted to tap in with them every week. And sometimes, as you see, we would go to their place where they lived in Monaco, in France. Malcolm and I went together when we were in Europe, and Malcolm lives in London, so it was easier for him. But like Malcolm shot in South America and Chile, and we had one camera, and I shot in. Were you in Marrakesh, Malcolm?
No, I didn't go to Marrakesh. I
went to Marrakesh. Yeah, so it was like that. But we knew Paris and Rome were going to be keys, and we knew Brooklyn was going to be the big, ending, and so we were waiting for that kind of thing. And yeah, we both, Malcolm has a huge career as a commercial director. None of us got rich making this, so we also have to we do other things. I was acting on TV a little bit while I was making this, and producing other things, but nothing to the extent. I mean, this was kind of my big focus, but I had started producing a couple other things at the same time. So we were busy, but we loved it. We had such an amazing time. And especially when you think about how different the world was then, where we just get on a plane and go somewhere, and sport, there's very few sport going on right now, very little. And it's just crazy how the world has changed since.
I think it was amazing when we were working together, when some of the characters are very delicate, as I said, you approach them like wild animals, and they're very sensitive and we were WhatsApping each other, messages, to kind of, support each other, so there was a real kind of discreet use of the cell phone, to kind of help each other along, and it was really, tag teaming was really fun, I think it was the most fun I had. Technically it was quite difficult in a way, because getting the camera into the right place to shoot the cars is difficult, because the photography that Formula E do is strictly for broadcast, so the cameras are very high, and that diminishes the car. The camera for us had to be really low, so technically getting the camera near the track was a real nuisance for them, but they accommodated us and allowed us to kind of creep up on the cars into the closest positions, that were safe enough.
And we shot everything with these beautiful old anamorphic lenses, which I'd never worked with before. Malcolm shoots quite a bit with them with his commercials and his features, but they're heavy, they're unruly, but it's really worth it. It was worth it, and it gave a completely different look than the broadcast. And as Malcolm said, we positioned the camera. We'd always shoot low. The whole movie is shot low. Even the interviews are kind of low. And it's a very different vibe than most sporting films or sporting events that you watch on purpose, obviously.
So what does that rig look like on the track? What sort of solutions did you come up with?
I mean, basically, it's just rigging the camera to a very low position, and all the car photography was on very long lenses. You need that level of compression, in order to squeeze the foreground and midground together. So there's nothing really fancy or unusual we used. It's all just a matter of finding the most annoying place to put the camera for Formula E, and asking them, because it's all about safety, so it was really, getting the camera into the right position. Technically, it was pretty straightforward what we did.
We did shoot with 35 millimeter film one race, and we did shoot with 16 millimeter film 2 races, because we wanted to have that kind of
glamour,
drama, and I think it really made a difference as well. It was really cool to mix it up. So,
I mean, it's such a glamorous sport. It's a highly elite. It's a bubble of the highest order. For us to get inside that, we really wanted to celebrate the idea of driving and then the idea of racing, and the idea of the tech was the background to this. But we really wanted to kind of, for every child who wants to race out there, we wanted to make this film a kind of a dream.
Did you have any moments where the people that you're filming had definitely did not want to have the cameras keep rolling?
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm had a couple of issues more than I did with them, and this guy Buemi just did not like us filming him a lot at all. But tell Malcolm, you have the Piquet story where
which Piquet story?
And you went up to Piquet to try to ask him a question.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I learned from Fisher is that, when you approach a driver, when you approach any subject, even for any documentary, and just relating to your students who are out there making documentaries now, is how you walk up to your subject, how you approach them is a whole thing in itself. How you stroll up to them and then you start a conversation, you start filming, and you start asking questions is something I was totally terrible at, and something that Fisher I really learned from Fisher. In a way, it's a kind of a dance. It's all about timing, and it's all about rhythm, and it's all about sensitivity. And I would clumsily just march up to a driver and expect him to start talking. And they're just not like that. They refuse to kind of to speak on your terms. Everything has to be on their terms, and it has to be as I said, it's a dance.
Yeah, you have to feel the timing of you have to strike at the right moment. If you're doing a verite film or a verite interview, you do have to strike. If you're doing a set up interview, that's a whole other technique, because these guys do those every day and they can be so boring, and you have to kind of really disarm them instantly, and basically make them understand you've never done an interview like this. This isn't like CNN Sports or BBC Sports. This is a film. We want to get your essence, and I'm going to ask you some personal shit, and you got to talk to me. Now, most of these guys are really nervous because they are all sponsored by like 40 companies, and if they say the wrong thing, they're afraid they're going to be dropped by their sponsors. So that's what I loved about Jev and Andre is they didn't give a shit.
I think getting to finding out who your protagonist is and finding their core feeling, like with Nelson Piquet Jr., he was basically an abandoned child, left by his parents, with their mechanic, and then with Jev, you've got this, bitter, angry, Frenchman, stung by the English, then you're finding these core values and starting to kind of discover them in the process of filming and interviewing them.
Do you start with something, I guess, when you're trying to disarm them? Are there like warm-up questions, or is it more effective to just jump right in with something hard?
Totally warm up, man. You got to build. You got to kind of script your interview to. I mean, I've had really tough interviews with people where, I know I'm going to ask one or two questions. Not in this movie so much. Nelson a little bit about his dad, but you're going to hit something they're not going to want to talk about, or they're not going to give you. So you kind of want to build and build. Another good technique is to do the interview like over a drink. So they're drinking, so people are loose, and you loosen them up. And we were lucky. We got a couple of, after the race when when these drivers had the day off, we had a couple good interviews when, glass of scotch, kind of like that. I noticed Michael Jordan in that documentary he just did, where he's got a glass of scotch and a cigar. But I didn't see Jordan drinking the scotch during the interview, but our boys did.
Well, if you have some control over the interview, you have clearly less control over life unfolding in front of the camera in verite. What was like the key, like difficult verite moment for you guys to capture that you think, was really important for the film?
Well, I mean, we missed at the beginning, like wins. We weren't in the right place. We couldn't get to the place, and Malcolm and I would get really depressed. Like, we didn't get that moment when they won. Now, the Formula E people capture it, but it looks, like that. But so a couple of those, Malcolm had this crazy thing where he was setting up the camera during a practice run, and Felix Rosenquist crashed in front of him and got out and didn't know where he was, and Malcolm's camera wasn't set up yet, so we couldn't get it. But something like that would have been like phenomenal to get,
Yeah, you're so much at the mercy of these fast-moving events around you that you have to be really prepared and ready and able to kind of nimble to be able to capture these moments around you. It's a bit almost like photojournalism. You've got to be active, aware, and awake.
Yeah, that stuff. And there were sometimes we wanted to film. Oh, there was other things they wouldn't let us film, which was there was a couple of times when the Techeetah team slammed the door on us because Jev and Andre were so mad, so upset, and they just slammed the door and wouldn't let us.
Is it?
Well, I find that you can't film everything, but sometimes you also, because you film so much, don't necessarily know that you have something in your footage that might wind up becoming really interesting when you get down to editing it. And I'm curious to know what your process is for going back and finding moments that maybe at the time weren't necessarily like the big moments that you might have flagged, but that then sort of wound up being interesting when you'd actually completed production.
You mean stuff that we dug out?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Gabe, our editor, Gabe Rhodes. We had, by the way, key to documentary filmmaking is you need a great editor. That they're like writing the story with you. You know, that's so crucial. And we can't thank him enough because he did an amazing job. But Gabe dug out a couple things. I mean, there was also like some scenes in French that my French is not great, and I wasn't exactly sure what they were saying. And then I forgot I shot them. And then you know that scene, the great scene in the car when Jeb and Andre are going to the track in Marrakesh in the morning, speaking French, and they're racing with the dude at 5 a.m. Like when I saw that scene, I was like, it looks fucking boring, right? I don't know what are they saying, and the sound wasn't great on the dailies, so I didn't even know. And then Gabe, like we had to translate it, and we were like, oh my god, this is amazing. And there it is. That's like a big moment in the movie, you know. So that was a real pleasant surprise. No, I mean there was little moment. What? Anything else, Malcolm? That we?
Well, it's such a, you know, a documentary is such a big undertaking. You know, there's, you know, especially when you've got a lot of things going on. You know, and what I noticed is with Fisher's experience is you're gathering up your data, you're collecting data. You know, as much as you can. You're and a lot of stuff we shot we just didn't use.
Yeah, that was a bummer. Like we went at
great shots that just didn't get in there.
We interviewed Bernie Eccleston, who you must know, Alex, right?
Actually, no.
Yeah. Bernie Eccleston's kind of the brains behind building Formula One, making it what it is. He was a huge celebrity in England, and he didn't want to be in it, and then he did, and then we interviewed him, and we cut it out, and oh my God, he was mad. Oh my God, you know.
Yeah,
I was always more into the drivers and the cars than the history.
Yeah. Well,
so,
what
fueled that decision? I mean, and that's such an interesting thing to have to cut from the movie.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, you know, we went to the Atacama Desert. We filmed the source of where lithium comes from, where all the lithium fields are, and we shot these beautiful shots of the Moon Valley with all this lithium, and we couldn't make it into the edit because you couldn't leave the kind of immediacy of the races in the immediacy of the story and depart and go to some faraway place. And Bernie Eccleston he's not germane to the sport anymore. He was once a long time ago, but he bears no importance on Formula E. It had to be in the moment and in the field, didn't it? If it stepped outside of that field, it didn't work. Don't you think, Fish?
Yeah, but it was sort of like I mean, he was probably one of the most important men in motorsport for 40 years, right? And yeah, and we couldn't find a way to make it work, you know. It, like Malcolm says, it just didn't. We went to Detroit to film Ford making a decision whether or not to join Formula E or not. And like, who cares? In the end of the day, it just was like, you know, it just didn't. It's hard, but you got to kind of follow your story, or if you derail at any point, you're in trouble. I mean, the other big storyline for us was, will the new battery work? Will season 4 take place with one car? So the only stories that we cared about were the competition, following our main drivers, and will this battery work? And we just stayed on those through lines, because anytime we digressed, you fell asleep. You didn't give a shit. We just were like, okay, we got it. And it hurts. It's a drag. But, you know, every document, when I did Before the Flood, Leo and I interviewed Bill Clinton, Michael Bloomberg, Sergey Brin, Ev Williams, co-founder of Twitter. List goes on. Cut them all out of the movie. Wow. They were pissed, but what are we going to do? I mean, they were pissed for a second. They don't really care, but, you know, it's hard. But, you know, if it doesn't serve the film, you got to be a killer. You got to be bold and just go, fuck it. Out.
Well, cutting an interview is, you know, understandable if it's not serving the story, but I'm curious about actually, you know, going to the lengths of you know, going to lithium fields and like those sorts of things do take production budget. And so at the time, how did you see it fitting in?
Well, first of all, Malcolm was going to film a race in Chile. So it was planned that they went right before the race because Atacama Desert's in Chile. So it wasn't like it was its own trip. But it was, Atacama Desert's far from Santiago. So it was going from Santiago to Atacama. And then from Atacama, you only shot for 2 days though, Max,
Yeah,
right?
we only shot for a couple of days there. But I think the problem is that it was a lesson for me in what's the core focus of the story you want to tell. And, it's like you can't, and it's like, here's your arc. Here's the single line of the film. And if you divert away from that, you just can't do it. But I think what I learned from documentaries working with Fisher is that there's so many babies that have to go out in the bathwater, and then Atacama Desert was one of them. And we had, as I said, Bernie Eccleston, the beating heart of Formula One, the man who created the infrastructure of it. Very controversial character. He just didn't fit. He really wasn't interested in Formula E either.
No, that was the problem. And he also talk a little bit like this. And you might have needed subtitles to understand what he's saying. Yeah.
So I just want to quickly start involving the audience here. We have a few questions coming in through the Q&A, and I've been doing something at these webinars that I think has been kind of fun. So if everyone out there who asked a question is willing, I tend to move people into the panelist section so that you can turn on your video and ask your question live. If the two of you feel comfortable with that, we can give it a shot, and if not, I can just
better. That's great.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's see. Okay, so let's start with Aaron Barney, and I'm going to move you over, Aaron. So just when you pop back up as a panelist, you can go ahead and turn on your video if you want to, or just turn on your audio to ask the question.
You're on mute, Aaron. There.
Hello, okay. And I'm in the dark.
Okay.
I'm in Idaho. Thank you so much. Now I need to read what I wrote. I'm nervous.
Oh, don't be.
I'm on the spot. Where's my... Well, I was wondering, for both of you, how do you find the story in editing and all of the footage? Are there any tips for finding story?
I think you start with a rough outline, right? So we started with a rough outline. We knew we were going to film one season, and then we knew we had Alejandro, the kind of ringmaster. At one point, we thought he would be in much more. He was in it a lot, but we thought he would be our guide through the whole journey. So Alejandro, we quickly realized that instead of him being our narrator guide, after we met him and kind of started filming, we realized he would be one of the characters just like the drivers. So we pushed that aside, but that was our basic structure. And we knew that we had the beginning, middle, and the end of the season. And we knew that we had a car for next season that would either work or not. And then we added all these other things. And me, especially with my environmental background of making environmental films, I went a little crazy, which is why you saw the Atacama Desert, Alex. We wanted to get more environmentalism into the movie. And there was a lot of ideas we had that were thrown away. But we threw those ideas away before we filmed them. So that saved us some money. But it's good to have a basic structure, and then really important that you don't know your ending. Because I think, and that you are open, and you have to be kind of like a dog sniffing for clues. You have to keep your eyes and ears and nose open to new things or new ideas, and be willing to just go take a left turn if you see it, that it's worth it. So the documentaries I love are when things happen that you can't believe. Oh my God, this took a crazy turn, So I don't know, Malcolm, any?
No, I think it's really interesting. You know, we don't know who was going to be the champion. We don't know who was going to, if there was going to be any injuries, or we don't know how the story was progressing. So as I said, we had to be very nimble and able to kind of shift and turn and follow the vicissitudes of the sport as it developed across the season.
Yeah, when I got involved in the Cove in like 2007, and I got involved in, Louis had shot like 400 hours, and the actual Japanese Cove story was a very small part of that movie. It wasn't his movie. His movie was about many other things. And then when I came in, we talk about throwing stuff out. I mean, we just realized that was the movie. The whole story is about Rico Berry in the Cove. And so like every movie finds its way, and you know, there's just so much to discover. And that's why I love documentaries. It's discovering constantly.
It reminds me, and this is a bit of an obscure reference, but when Chaplin came to Hollywood, he brought with him his theater troupe, and they started making films on a staircase with no script. Somebody would fall down and they would like, let's take this stumble, this stunt, and turn it into a story. They decided, let's write scripts. It'll be much easier that way, rather than having to play, to have this role play. But I think this is what documentaries is like. You don't have a script. You can't have a script. Your script develops as the movie develops, right, Fish?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
My other question was for Fisher. How does your acting career inform your work in documentaries? Is storytelling the same in both mediums, or what, is there anything you could say on that?
I think being an actor makes me really get into the heads of my characters. So like I think one of the things I learned from being an actor is that I try to go inside of these guys' heads and women's head that I interview. So I try to understand what they're going through, so that when I'm presenting myself to them and the questions to them, it's almost like I'm doing a scene with them. I'm like dancing, like Malcolm calls it dancing. You're sort of dancing. And I think that being an actor really helped me. The storytelling a little bit, although I would say I'm not, structure is not my strength as a documentarian, character is, but I will say that having acted in so many movies, I like to make my documentaries feel like a feature film. And also, so being part of that, I like to watch documentaries that are like watching a feature. Those are my favorite kinds. Unless I'm watching a Ken Burns, which is great because it is what it is. But so I think my acting helped me in that sense. Hopefully.
Okay, I am going to call on David Imani. There's also some questions that I'm going to read out because not everyone is camera ready. But let me just go ahead and find David and move him over. Okay.
Malcolm, Lexi says you better get some sleep tonight for your shoot tomorrow. Malcolm's doing a shoot tomorrow.
Oh, and it's late. You're in London right now?
I am in London, but I went to bed. Tell Lexi I went to bed and had a few hours already.
Good. Okay. Hello, David.
How you doing, guys?
Good.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for taking the time, and what a great documentary. Really fantastic. I'm a huge racing fan myself, big Formula One fan since the early 90s, and I could really appreciate that approach that you guys took. And it was sort of where I always kind of wished that Senna documentary had gone in terms of the in-depth into the character, that kind of look, which is, as you just mentioned, is your strength, Fish. So thank you for that. That was really enjoyable. My question is, what was behind your decision to so early on sort of take this big gamble on this your approach to the story as expecting it to have that sort of, maybe expecting is the wrong word, but that narrative arc, the feature length sort of narrative arc that you guys bet on so early on. And fortunately, a lot of these things that unfolded sort of contributed to making it the perfect, or you can call it that, an excellent film as it has become. So what was the decision behind that early bet, if that makes any sense?
Well, I think first I want to say that in retrospect, having just produced a 7 episode series, I kind of think this would have been so much easier if we did it as a series, right? Because you have the races and all that.
Sure.
That wasn't even on the table. So I think Malcolm and I just looked at it like Hong Kong is the first race, Brooklyn is the last race, and we were going to bookend it there. And then those were our first act, and our last act would be opening and closing. And then we went around that, basically, and felt like, the film could be anywhere from 70 to 120 minutes, and then fill it in. But we were brutal and ruthless, as we were saying, with if it doesn't fit in the story, we're out. It's out. And we just got really lucky with that. We started filming Jev and Andre from the jump, and it was all
chemistry, right?
Yeah, they have great chemistry, and yeah, it was just great. And then ironically, this year they broke up. They're no longer teammates. Yeah, but so that was our structure. There were definitely, we had cops around in terms of like, well, saying cop today is different. I didn't mean it like that, but we had police. We were policing ourselves so that if it got too environmental preachy, we cut it out. And because I tended at the beginning to put a lot of that in there, and it just didn't fit. And
best laid plans.
Yeah, exactly. So, that was it. And then we just got really lucky that it came out that way.
I think
lucky for us.
What's the name of that casting agent, a great acting teacher who spotted Brando in New York?
Stella? No, you mean
Stella Adler.
Yeah.
Stella Adler. So it just reminded me when we met the drivers and they were in the paddock walking about, Fisher was looking at Jev and he was like, he's really interesting. It reminded me of that story. A friend of ours made a documentary about Brando, about Stella Adler saw Brando and went, you. And it was a bit, Fisher saw Jev and went, you. And I think what Fish was open to was to allow his to instinct. And his instinct had a sense that Jev was a killer and a winner.
Yeah, because he wasn't even on our list when we asked Alejandro who he thought would win that year. He didn't even give us Jev's name. It was weird.
I think that's it's an interesting part of being a documentarian is not allowing your brain to dominate, is allowing your instinct to function. And I think that was an example. We got Jev, and Jev is a pure-bred killer driver. He wanted to kill, he wanted to drive, he wanted to win more than he wanted to breathe. And I think that was, capturing that was key. Keying onto that was a key decision, wasn't it, Fish?
Yeah, we were lucky. Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Okay, let me ask a couple of these questions on behalf of someone in the audience. And Mark, I'll call on you after that. So just get your lighting right. Okay, so the debate about combustion engines versus electric is similar to the debate about film versus digital. In film, the transition to digital is fully underway. When will we reach a tipping point in electric vehicles?
Malcolm?
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
When will we reach a tipping point in electric vehicles?
It's a really good question because I think the coronavirus is going to change everything now. I think, yes, electric cars were coming, but I don't know if we're going to be able to build internal combustion engines anymore. A Formula E car has, say, 20 moving parts. whereas a Formula One car has 2,000 to 3,000 moving parts. So it's just the cost of engineering and machining and putting together a gas engine isn't going to be economically viable. So I think we're looking at the electric mobility coming in a really big way.
And also the prices are going down on electric vehicles. The batteries are getting longer lasting as Formula E shows, and all the major manufacturers are starting to make electric cars. Right now, it's just about money, because they need to come down. You need to be able to buy an electric car for 15, 20 grand, and you need to be able to charge it. Like where I live in Brooklyn, it's very difficult I have no place to charge an electric car.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really tough still. But I live in where we don't have, it's not like I have a driveway or a garage. The garages in Brooklyn are starting to get chargers, but it's been slow. But I think Malcolm's right. And also I think people aren't going to want to have a driver, man. We'll see how these self-driving cars. I mean, I know there's been a lot of. It's going to take time, but.
So the technology coming out of Formula E, the technology is more valuable than the races themselves. Self-driving, AI, all this tech. Like a self-driving Uber car is 10 times cheaper than a normal Uber car. So you don't have to pay the driver, you don't have to feed the driver, you don't have to feed his children or educate his or her children. It's all about economy, and it's all about the less engineering, and it's all about AI now, I believe.
Yeah, but that brings us to the next question is like, well, what are people going to do for a living? But that's a whole other movie.
There was an Israeli company a while back that had developed a series of electric car battery stations where you would buy the car but not the battery, and then when you went to the station, it would swap out the battery. So it was like, you would go in as if you were getting gas, but you would drive over something like at a oil change place, and someone like a robot underneath would just swap out the battery with something charged, and you'd be good to go.
Yeah, because they're really heavy.
And I was curious if you'd heard of that and if that had any success.
I hadn't heard of that. No, but Formula E, they wanted to do that in the cars before.
Yeah,
the batteries are so heavy that they couldn't do it. So
Okay, another question here is: except for Jaguar, why are most U.S. car companies visibly absent from Formula E, especially electric car manufacturers like Tesla and Gemini?
Tesla didn't want to be in Formula E because they wanted to spend all of their R&D and resources on making their cars because they were so backed up in their orders. Ford, like we said, was going to be in, and they bailed at the last minute. We don't know really why, and it's a bit of a bother. And that they didn't, because they're starting to actually manufacture electric cars quite a bit now. And with Formula E, it's just still feels like a European sport. There are no American drivers, and it's a bummer. I mean, I know Alejandro tried to lure a couple of American drivers over, some of the top NASCAR guys. They just didn't want to leave America. Funny, So, but that is a good question. And, there were no women drivers either, and there are no drivers of color. It's a very much still a privileged white man sport. And that was one of the issues I had when originally I was asked to do it. I was like, well, these are just a bunch of spoiled white kids, but they have their, it wasn't, I have to say they are interesting and they're damaged just like everybody else, but obviously, and the good thing about Formula E is it brings the race to the people. So like in Brooklyn, they gave away tons of tickets to the community. And it brought like a whole different audience to racing and to motorsport, which is what I wanted to do with the film. So I think it's a good thing.
So in the meantime, if, we've gotten a couple of comments saying that the Israeli company I'd brought up, A Better Place, was the name of it, has gone out of business. So
Oh, bummer.
that's a shame. Okay, I'm going to call on Mark. Let me just move him over. Hey.
Oh, gentlemen.
Hey,
I
Mark.
thoroughly enjoyed this film, especially since I watched it not knowing a thing about what it was except the title when I started watching it.
Cool.
And, so it just drew me into the whole world. And immediately after watching it, I texted my friend who's a huge fan of all kinds of racing. And I'm like, are you into Formula E? I just saw this great movie you've got to see. And she's like, I don't like Formula E because the cars don't make enough noise. She says, I love the noise. But when I was watching the film, I didn't really get that impression of the cars being quiet. So I was wondering both how you approach the production sound recording for the film, which is always challenging with the documentary, and especially in the type of environments you're shooting. And then after that, how you approach the post-production sound design for the film to even though the cars are supposed to be quiet, did you ramp it up? How did you go about handling the sound?
Well, the cars make a kind of cool sound. It's not like they're loud. It's kind of like a pew, pew, you know. So I have a dear friend named Ren Kleiss, who's Oscar-nominated sound designer, mixer, did Star Wars, and he came to one of the races for us, and he put his beautiful handmade mics in the cars, and that was our bass sound. We used it. He kind of gave us this beautiful palette of the real sound, but with his mics, and we use those quite a bit because the sound is cool, but it is different, right? A lot of people who love Formula One are like your friend. They don't even want to bother with Formula E, but I promise you, if they were there and got to listen, they would dig it. Then I had Skip Levesey, who's an Oscar-winning mixer, did Gravity, does all the Coen Brothers movies, happens to be a big racing fan. He mixed the film with his amazing crew. So we spent a lot of time and energy on the sound to make it, you're hearing the real sound, but it's obviously got a little heightened tweak to it. And but we really made took great pains to make that sound sing. And make those cars kind of feel like you're there with them.
It was very effective, though. I really, the sound, I think, was a very effective part of the movie, and makes me want to go see one of these races right away.
Yeah, you should. Where are you? Are you in California?
I'm in Boston right now. It's kind of tight here for a track, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Well, one of the things I found ironic about going to the Grand Prix is that, you're there, you're live, and it's exciting. And then, you actually have to watch the TV to get the overhead aerial view of the cars to even understand what's happening on the track, because they go by so fast.
Yeah, I know. These races are so much. Mark, tell your friend that these races are much more exciting than Formula One.
Just another quick question, though. Did you have complete access to all of the actual footage that was being shot by the television crews that were?
Yeah, which was great, but also a tremendous pain in the ass because we had a lot of stuff to go through. But yes, they gave us all that stuff, which was helpful. Although it was shot with different cameras and a whole different way, but we used a bunch of it.
Great, thank you.
I think mounting cameras on those cars is really difficult because there's all kinds of safety and everything has to be approved and designed. It was difficult for us to clamp cameras onto the car,
Yeah.
So we had to use some of their footage, especially the helmet cams and stuff. We had some leeway. We could adjust some camera angles, but they were pretty stiff with us.
Did any of the cameras get damaged?
No, but our cameraman got hit in the leg at one point. But he's okay. But yeah, that was scary. Yeah. Yeah, those cars are nuts because you can't hear them either sometimes. It's quiet. The whistles, they go, get out of the way.
Well, that was like the big joke on Weeds many years ago, that she drove a Prius, and so a drug dealer wanted to use it for a drive-by because no one could hear it coming down the block.
Yeah.
Okay, I am going to call on Steven, and just given the time difference, we should probably let Malcolm hop off in a few minutes. So, all right, let me go over to Steven and move him over.
Hi, Fisher.
Hey, Steven.
I want to say thank you very much for doing this. I've been a fan of yours since the days of early edition.
All right. Oh, yeah. I had a lot more hair.
I wanted to ask you, besides the interviewing techniques, were there any other lessons that you learned from before the flood that you were able to incorporate into production of this film?
Well, I mean, Malcolm and I both tried to roll that camera as much as possible before and after each interview that we did, because actually that's when we would get some good sound bites from these people. So that was one thing that I learned that a little bit before the flood. But and we didn't use many tripods, so we had a very much of a everything felt really alive. Even the interviews, we didn't use tripods. The poor cameraman wanted to kill me because they were so like sore by the end. But I think there was something really effective about not having a camera on a stick and just having the ability to move. Just like we talked about, just the warming up of your subjects and trying to get to know them and calling them and, saying, hey, man, this is what I want to talk to you about. Is it okay? And even if they say no, I usually can get them to say yes by the end of a conversation. It's working them like a subject. It's like when you're directing an actor, you kind of are directing these guys to open up to you. It's one direction, open up, but tell me the truth. Tell me something you don't really want to say. Tell me how you're really feeling. And that it's kind of me acting, feeling like an actor to get them to do that.
Thank you, Fisher.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I just wanted to pass along a comment from Amy, who said that she really did feel like this film played like a feature, that all along while watching, it had the excitement, the tension, and character story arcs that we all love in a feature.
Great.
So in case you guys hadn't caught that, I wanted to pass it along. And this is probably on a few people's minds. What did DiCaprio bring to the table besides his name and appearance in the film? Did he help finance or sell the film to a distributor?
He helped. He helped finance the film, and it was really his idea. And he gave some notes, when we were finished. But I mean, it was really his idea. So, and I do want to say another thing is that after we finished this, Leo and myself, and a couple other people, a company called Radical Media, we executive produced a miniseries on the History Channel that Malcolm directed called Grant that just aired. It was 6 hours that Malcolm did a brilliant job directing, and I got to direct second unit, and it turned out really well, and we're really proud of it. And obviously it's very current as to what's going on in today's world, on just unfortunately how little has changed in certain aspects of this country. But so we really had another great experience after this.
That's great. Are you going to keep the streak alive?
We'd like to, right, Max?
Yeah, I mean it's so much less lonely working together, because and also you're firing ideas at each other and shooting down the good ones, or shooting the bad ones down and kind of enhancing the good ones, or both. and there's a playfulness to it. And it's really interesting, you know, in your tag team in Good Cop, Bad Cop,
Yes.
you can play the situation and find and go deeper into the lives of the drivers.
And on
'Cause the-
Grant, it was great too because we already had worked together, so we had such a great dialogue and relationship when
Yeah.
in
And I
that.
think, you know, making a doc or a TV show or a film, everything's the same. It's the commitment to the core idea and the willingness of the director to connect with the subject and get right inside the subject, no matter what it takes. And even if that subject hates you or loves you, you know, you've got to be Teflon enough to allow to wade in there and find the material you need to make that movie.
I normally ask this when we're in person here in Los Angeles as to, you know, how can people share the film with their friends and family. But I realize now that we have this sort of global reach with online webinars that Hulu might not be available outside of the US, or it might be in some countries and not others. So I'm just curious, I know it's on Hulu as of today, but where else would people need to look for it if they're not US based?
I mean, that's a good question. It's been airing on, it aired on Channel 4 in England and Canal Plus in France and in Germany. But I would assume it's going to go on iTunes in Europe after it airs. Now, we'll find out, but maybe we could do a little email chain and get you that information.
Yeah, definitely. I can also shoot that out to the people that were registered for the webinar in case they wanted to get the word out.
Cool.
Well, thank you guys so much. Malcolm, I know it must be the dead of night for you right now. So
It's good.
The last thing, hey, I would just like to say one thing to your students who are filming the protests, because I made a film about Occupy Wall Street, and I was in there for years, for months on and off filming. But those protests were much different, and it was much easier to film because you weren't worried that you were going to get beat up or, you know. And also it helped that I looked like the way I looked, and the cops left me alone. But, you know, just filming protests is easy to just point the camera. There's a lot going on. But what's difficult is finding that story that no one else is telling, because everybody's got one of these out there and is filming. So I just say, hey, first of all, be safe. Second of all, there's a coronavirus. Third of all, protest. This is so important that we're protesting right now, because I think this country, you know, it's time. It's fucking long overdue. But if you are going to make a film, really find a character or characters that you latch onto, and try to stay away from. It's so easy to just get caught up in the protest stuff when you're making a movie. So try to key on something very specific. And the fact that everybody's filming, and there's probably 100 movies coming out about this, but everybody is unique and everybody has a unique vision and a unique voice. But just make sure it doesn't get cloudy. And that's really difficult with protest movies.
yeah, I think that because we're like right in the middle of planning a structure to what they're doing right now. They're out there and they're capturing things, but we really want to be able to work with them to actually tell a story as opposed to just having documentation. And so we're gonna try and really sort of work through a variety of things. And there's all sorts of questions also, because, you know, what is a Black student filmmaker putting themselves into if they're trying to film the police, you know, and something gets out of hand? Like, when do you stop filming? Or, you know, maybe when you have the impulse to stop filming, but you know that what's going on is important to be recorded. So there's really that sort of the struggle, I think, any young documentarian is to go through when they're in that sort of in the arena where they could get hurt. And not, I mean, obviously the virus on top of it is a complication that, you know, they've never had to face before. So
Yeah, you know, a few of them should just tell their own personal story and how they're feeling, and make it about that and what this, you know. But anyway, I applaud everybody, and especially people out there. And you know, I went out on Friday and Saturday night in Brooklyn, and it was like nothing. I've been in a lot of protests. I've been in Tahrir Square. I've been in Brazil in protests. I'd never seen anything like it in Brooklyn. It was wild and scary. So it's gotten more peaceful, but those, you know, just people have to, but we got to keep this going, and we got to change shit now. So
it definitely feels like the coalition continues to build out here. And I mean, the marches are so deep with people that I mean, I was you just look outside here in LA, and it might be passing you for like a half an hour, and that's one of several happening all over the city. So it's very inspiring to see that many people come together to fight for justice.
It is. It's time, man. It's been a long time coming.
Well, thank you both again so much for sharing this movie with us. And
good luck.
I'll make it out to the track.
See you at the track. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, good luck out there.
Yeah, good luck out in LA. All right.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.